Welcome back, everyone, to Vox Markets. My name is Paul Hill, and I'm delighted today to have with me Dr. Adam Hill, the CEO of Oncimmune, one of the most groundbreaking immunodiagnostics firms in the world. So welcome, Adam.
Lovely to be on, Paul. Lovely to see you.
Yeah. Now, given COVID, it's sort of like converted most sort of like of the public into closet medical students and scientists in terms of sort of like, antibodies and viruses and antigens, trying to understand it. Can you just quickly walk us through what Oncimmune technology does and how it sort of benefits society?
Yeah, no problem. So we're in the business of understanding the body's own response against itself. We all have an immune response, and that immune response has hit the popular media recently, of course, with the pandemic and the development of vaccines and diagnostics to try and help us through the lockdown period. But that immune response, it will not surprise your listeners to learn, is thousands of years old, passed from mother to child, and has evolved to pick up disease, pathogens, primarily bugs, viruses, bacteria, fungi. But what might surprise your listeners to learn, of course, is that the same immune response can actually attack your own cells. This happens in autoimmune disease, and indeed it happens in cancer.
I know this actually, Adam, from first hand, because I've got an autoimmune disease. So I would absolutely agree with with what you're saying, because it basically attacks and it could give you a whole lot of side effects.
A whole lot of side effects. That's right. And these cells, which are aberrant, that the immune system recognizes as being
foreign or
mental or foreign, it will attack. And we're in the business of picking up that signal. Now, that signal, interestingly, can be really, really, really early in the disease progress. In the case of your autoimmune disease, that signal would have been available maybe 10 years or more before you were diagnosed with it. And it's exactly the same in cancer. Our own data demonstrates that we can pick up a signal 4 years, and in some cases as much as 7, 8, or 9 years.
Well, I've had the problem for about as long as I've lived, since I was a kid. So that's right. Sort of like 40, 50 years, and it's only been recently that it's been diagnosed. So again, it's been there and been present for a long period and not been treated at all.
Well, there you go. And so that's one of the major attributes of this particular biomarker class that we're experts in, we're world experts in. But the other attribute that's only becoming apparent over the last couple of years is that you can select the right patients for the right treatment. And that might be the more valuable attribute of this biomarker class as well here.
And that's the personalised medicine side of it.
It is. And of course, there has been lots of discussion over the last decade or so about the move towards personalized medicine. But where you see that in action is in clinical trials.
Yes.
Pharmaceutical companies need to pick the right patients that are going to respond positively to their drugs and have a limited number of side effects. Yeah. Otherwise, they don't get the approvals that they need. And that is a multi-billion-dollar industry that we're now tapping into through that science.
And I would just give you an example to people who are listening to that, because the biggest drug in the world currently is Humira, which is worth about $20 billion. And I've been through the whole NHS clinical pathway, came out the other end, and I was one of the 50% who wouldn't be affected by the benefits of Humira. So personalised medicine would not only have saved me a lot of time, but would have saved the NHS about £10,000 to £15,000 a year in just the expenditure on Humira as well. So
well, there you go. And that's exactly what pharma companies are now realizing. And so they want to be able to select the right patients, not only for their clinical trials, but they want to select patients for use of the drug once it's launched into the market, because that can fundamentally change the economics for them when they address that market.
Yeah, and I'm guessing this, so the whole using your immune system for one diagnosis, one for sort of like predictive medicine and personalized medicine. I mean, this is like the holy grail from my understanding of new medicine, because we don't understand, or the sort of the science is so undeveloped. So I'm guessing Oncimmune is probably one of the sort of the flag bearers, the leading sort of players in this area. Well, it's a new area and has huge growth opportunities because scientists just don't understand it yet. It's got a huge runway ahead of it, I'm guessing.
It has. I mean, we're learning really fast in this space. And there was actually a Nobel Prize in 1960 for describing how the body understands what's normal and what's abnormal, and sometimes can get it wrong, called immune editing and surveillance. But actually, it was only a decade ago or so that the cancer community awoke to the idea that the immune system might have a role in controlling and treating cancer. And hence, from a standing start, they've gone from zero to an $80 billion market opportunity today in immunotherapies. So the rate of progress over the last decade has been dramatic, but most of that progress has been on the T cell axis of the immune system. And we're experts in the B cell, the other axis of the immune system, which is now, over the last 2 or 3 years, really hot stuff.
Yeah, and I think if a bit of background, I think if people want to actually have a look at immunotherapies, just look at Merck and Keytruda, and that's the now fast approaching the biggest drug in the world, I think. And Bristol Myers Optiva is not far behind of immunotherapy. So you're right. Now, the business, I understand, is split into sort of two parts. There's a product side, which does the tests with diagnostics, and then really the platform, which I think the tests sort of like sit on. Can you just quickly take us through how that works and what the synergies are and how one works with the other?
Sure. So the platform, and there is one platform only in our business, is very simple to understand. It is a library of proteins proprietary to us, over 8,000. And really, when I say that, I mean a bank of freezers with some frozen vials of protein in them that we interrogate to answer questions on behalf of pharmaceutical companies, or indeed answer questions that we think are useful in the clinical domain. Now, we interrogate it through a long listing tool, what we would call a high throughput discovery tool, proprietary again to us, called Seratag, that tries to distill that 8,000 down to maybe 1,000 or 1,500 of those proteins. And then a shortlisting tool is applied, which will distill it even further to 60 to 90 of those proteins. And once we've got to that stage, we develop a tool called a Navigate tool, again, proprietary to us. We've got a bunch of these in cancer, a bunch in autoimmune disease, and we're developing one at the moment in infectious diseases, which your listeners are going to be particularly interested in. But that tool then is used to deliver our service. So we receive blood samples, we wash that blood sample across the tool, we get a heat map of different colors, binding events between antibodies and antigen. We then now analyze that heat map using our proprietary bioinformatics tools, our response models, our data science models, if you like, that have been handcrafted in-house to provide an answer, something that's actionable to the pharmaceutical company. Now, it's at this point that we want to try and hook ourselves into that value and develop a product, which brings us onto the product side of the house. Now, that heritage in developing product, of course, spans back to 2012. We developed our own product, early CDT lung. We've launched that into the market and sold 65,000 of those products. So we stand alone as the only company that's gone blank sheet of paper through to launch and development of evidence behind autoantibody panels in the world. We're the only ones that have gone nose to tail with this particular biomarker class.
So this unique sort of proprietary platform effectively helps Oncimmune develop its own products if it chooses to do so. There's sort of the early CDT test for lung and liver, but also effectively produces an immense amount of useful information for drug discovery, whether that be on the sort of like the diagnostic side or on the drug side, for other third players. So effectively, what you've done with your own lead test or your own lead product is effectively endorsed and shown to work effectively. You know, the power of that platform, I guess.
Exactly that. And, it's the attributes of the autoantibody class of biomarker have been unveiled by us taking that first product to market. Yeah. And now that's why pharma customers come and knock on our door. And as you say, they engage us not only to help understand the on and off target effects of their drugs in the preclinical phase, but also in the clinical phase of development where they're running clinical trials. They want us to pick the right patients to load onto those clinical trials.
Right. Okay.
Or help them unpick why they're seeing an immune response that they hadn't predicted in the first instance.
Yeah. And how many samples do you get sort of like in a year for new samples? I mean, I'm trying to get to the how big is this panel and how quickly is it growing?
Well, we receive from pharma companies in a typical contract a couple of hundred samples in the first instance, with the option always within those contracts to extend to a couple of thousand. We've seen Roche Pharma extend recently, and we've got a couple of other in-flight programs that are very imminently going to be extended. I suspect. So we see thousands and thousands of samples a year. We've indeed just increased our capacity to analyze those samples from about 8,000 to about 16,000 samples.
So for investors, this seems to be really key, because what you're doing, you've got your proprietary leading platform that it gives you unique insights for your clients, but actually it's getting bigger, it's getting deeper, and effectively it's getting better, because the results that you get from a bigger population of samples are going to be more accurate, more beneficial to your clients, and produce better future products. So, for instance, your lead product for early CDT lung cancer testing, you could do if you wanted to, or somebody else could do. You could do a 2.0 or a 3.0, upgrade it, simply because your database now, your platform is getting better by the day, effectively.
That's right. It continues to grow. Our knowledge continues to grow. And you touched upon an important point, because the data asset and the bioresource that we have underpinning the platform that we commercialize is now vast, as a function of Oncimmune of old being around for 18 years since we spun out of Nottingham University, and the acquisition we made in Germany being around for 20 years. There's 38 years worth of experience and biosample and data collection that we now use to not only deliver our own services, build our own tools, our competencies and capabilities, but also will start to allow pharma companies access to. In the past, I maybe described this as protecting the downside of any investment. It's the bricks and mortar. It's not on our balance sheet, but it's there and it's valuable. But tomorrow, it will certainly have an impact on our P&L, because pharma companies are getting in to that bioresource, and with our help, they're using it to gain time. Because what that bioresource represents is time. Those clinical trials took a long time and a huge amount of capital to deliver, and those samples, therefore, are incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to give you an indication, just to give investors an indication of value, I mean, we've had Exact Sciences just buying one of your sort of like rivals or competitors, Thrive, and likewise with Illumina just buying Grail. For Grail, I think we're 8 billion, and for Thrive was 2 billion. And if you work out their sort of like investment stroke, the price they paid for investment, it was around about 4 to 6 times investment. And I believe you've spent, £70 million so far on your platform. So just use a modest 4 times that, you get £280 million divided by 64 million shares. You get over £4.30, and your shares are what, 170. So when you talk about asset pinning, then that seems to be pretty good, really.
That's right. I mean, this market, the diagnostics and tools space, the D&T space, has gone from being valued very much on a revenue multiple, as it was maybe a decade ago, 5 years ago, maybe even, to strategics really valuing the science. And look, I put in place a 3-year forward strategy when I joined the company 2.5 years ago, that said 3 things. The most important of those, I suspect, was that we're going to partner. We're a small company on a small island in the middle of the Atlantic, and we want to play with the big boys in the global life sciences space. So we need to be a good partner. We need to hold hands with others to gain access to their critical mass and their channels to market, but importantly, you bake yourself into their product development roadmaps, and ultimately
DNA.
you find yourself an acquirer.
Yeah, well, exactly. But also, you say you bake yourself into their DNA, haven't you? Because they become an essential part. There's nowhere else to go for that level of technology. I mean, I saw a report, and I'd point investors to have a look at it. There was when I think it was when Exact Sciences bought Thrive, which was only last month or 2 months ago, for $2.1 billion. They did a couple of slides, and they highlighted how big this market immunodiagnostics could be. Do you want figure they came out with, Adam?
No, go on, tell me.
$75 billion from a standing start.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's potentially massive. Massive, and it will follow suit. I'm sure the immunotherapy market that has grown at a similar breakneck speed over the last decade.
So just diving down a bit further, going into your product side, then the early CDT lung test, etc. How's that progressing in terms of commercialization? I know you've got a big deal in the States. You've also got relationships around the world, one in China as well. And then you've got the NHS potentially, who could be doing mass screening, because they already do mass screening for breast cancer and cervical cancer and stuff.
Yeah, sure. So this test we launched in 2012, sold 165,000. We actually delivered over 250,000 of these tests, which gives you a sense that we've been investing heavily in clinical trials, and most of those clinical trials have been out of the US. The most recent, however, was up in Scotland, which is the largest clinical trial of its kind, giving us the highest level of evidence of any blood biomarker in cancer detection today, let alone lung cancer. But it was a lung cancer focused trial demonstrating a 36% reduction in late-stage diagnosis of cancer. What this does is it really forces healthcare systems that we all know are incredibly conservative at the way that they adopt these sorts of novel technologies into a space that they don't really have existing technologies in today. It forces them to think about how to adopt these technologies in a bit more detail. And indeed, that's what we've seen, right? That's what we've seen in the US. That's what we've seen we're seeing in the UK today, and that's what we're seeing in Western Europe at the moment.
And just putting that into context, I mean, 36%. Early stage identification of sort of early stage sort of cancer in patients. If you extrapolated that across the UK, I believe there are roughly around about 35,000 lung cancer patients people who die regrettably each year. And if you have an early diagnosis, particularly sort of 4 years, you improve their survival rates by 50% plus or so. So what you're talking about is that, I mean, the NHS currently spends nearly £10,000 a year just treating patients, and the sort of like and also there's about a wider economy of around about sort of 2.5 billion pounds. It's been estimated before. So you get a huge amount of cost savings, you get huge improvements in patient outcomes, and presumably you just get a much better quality of life. So
that's right. I mean, look, the survival of lung cancer at stage 1, the earliest phase of the disease, is about 70% at 5 years. It's 6% if you're picked up at stage 4. Now about 58% of patients are picked up in the later stages of disease. The majority of those are picked up actually in intensive care, in an accident and emergency department, coughing up blood. So it is a very late stage diagnosis that's most common in our own healthcare system, and the lowest hanging fruit here is to diagnose early. But you're absolutely right to point to not just the clinical utility, the effectiveness of the test to pick up more early disease and improve lives, but also the cost-saving ability of a test such as this. With more expensive immunotherapies now coming online, it can cost up to £200,000 a year to treat one person with lung cancer. At stage 1, the average cost is about £5,000 to treat them to cure.
Yeah.
So what we're finding is that now immunotherapies are creating a greater economic imperative for earlier detection than has ever been the case, which is which works very well for us.
Well, being a finance man, that cost benefit analysis certainly works for me. Never mind the patient sort of like benefit. I'm guessing sort of lung cancer, I mean, it'll be massively applicable to Asia, where there's heavy smoking as well, sort of China. I don't know whether it's South America as well. So it's got a lot of sort of overseas opportunities. And I presume you could you haven't got to do all the tests yourself. You can license that out.
That's right. Look, I mean, we actually sell through 19 relationships into 24 countries at the moment. China is one of our strategic partners, and our lung cancer test is currently going through a multi-center study there to see how it works in the Chinese population to support its NMPA approval process. And in South America, we have distributors, and our Brazilian distributor is a particular star, who is, despite there being a real issue with the pandemic response in South America, currently driving tests into the major healthcare systems there that are still dealing with cancer patients, because guess what? Pandemics don't halt the need to treat and diagnose cancer patients effectively.
Yeah, and I'm guessing sort of like in the UK, with the NHS deciding whether it's going to sort of like widely sort of like test the lung cancer test. I mean, it's just been delayed because of COVID, I'm guessing, because they've got enough testing on their plate at the moment.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's absolutely surprised me the amount of interest that we've seen over the pandemic. But of course, the system hasn't been able to deal with that interest until it's overcome the initial response to COVID. Certainly, the system is in a far better shape today than it was 5 or maybe 6 months ago. And so I think it's a matter of time really now.
Oh, yeah.
Before these things are adopted, and we start to see the cancer services within our own healthcare system dealing with the backlog of misdiagnoses that we've all started to hear about over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think for investors, they can look at it sort of positively, because you've got this huge tidal wave of pent-up demand and patients who haven't been screened coming down the pipe, and companies obviously like Oncimmune should benefit from that. In terms of the sort of the big announcement on the COVID side, you mentioned on infectious diseases. I mean, we've obviously covered the oncology in detail, the opportunities there where it's absolutely applicable for early diagnosis and treatment. What about the sort of the infectious diseases with COVID? Because if you can crack that nut, then you're probably onto a multi-billion winner.
Well, that's right. And look, I mean, we were approached very early on in the first response, like I think every diagnostic company, quite honestly, in the UK, and turned down the opportunity to develop a serological assay. But that conversation continued with central government, and today, we sit on and are delivering a program with government funding, hand in hand with the Medicines Discovery Catapult, to develop one of those Navigate panels, one of those research tools that I spoke about for infectious diseases, read COVID in this case. And that panel will essentially help do two things. It will help from a biomarker perspective, understand and characterize whether people are mild, moderate or severe in their response to the disease. But it will also look to predict their potential response to any number of the therapeutic assets that are currently being developed. Why is this important? Well, it's important because normally when we develop therapeutic assets, we've got a disease model. We have an understanding of how the disease is causing the signs and symptoms that we want to ameliorate through the use of this therapy, and we can target it effectively. We don't have that. We're learning about that disease model in COVID. And so the majority of the programs in COVID are repurposed assets, drugs that were developed for something else or are being developed for something else that have been steered towards the COVID response. So a panel such as ours helps effectively triage your way through the huge volumes of clinical trial data on those assets.
Yeah.
And so you can focus your attention on the ones that are most likely to work. Now, we haven't gone and pushed this at all. There is no sales effort behind it, and already there's inbound interest from big pharma and biotech alike. We signed Cedars-Sinai a couple of weeks ago to be first onto our beta panel. In fact, we announced only yesterday a biotech on the west coast of the US wanting to gain access to that same beta panel. But by the time this panel is ready for prime time, the industrialized panel is ready for prime time, beginning of January, I'm very sure that we're going to have a string of big pharma contracts under our belt.
And just sort of like pushing the clock, nobody's going to hold you to this, Adam, but you sort of like, if you look for sort of 10 years ahead, I mean, we've got a massive sort of addressable market here, and nobody knows how much it is, but all we know it's going to be huge. What indicatively would you say the sort of the size of the business that you would hope to be, and what would be the sort of split? I'm guessing it would be more panel than products, and I'm guessing it would be quite a big turnover.
Yeah, look, I think that this business, from a relatively well understood and fixed cost base, with only a marginal increase in costs, can scale very effectively. To give you a sense, we go from 8,000 to 16,000 samples a year, and with the ability to extend further to 24,000 samples a year, with a couple of heads and a small amount of investment in capex in our existing footprint in Germany, and that very much is going to be the catalyst of the business. I think if our product services, our pharma services business is doing 80-85% of the revenue, I wouldn't be too surprised. However, moving forward, the product side of the business will be hybridized with some of these opportunities that we'll co-develop with pharma, and much of that revenue, beyond the service that we're delivering them, is going to drop straight to the bottom line as a function of it being licensed and royalty driven. And so I can imagine having quite a light organization that's highly scalable with very, very little marginal further investment, that has the potential to drive significant top line growth that is particularly profitable.
Okay, and I'm guessing then most of the sort of the service side is, I mean, it's with big blue chips. We're talking Novartis and Roche and Genentech and these sort of like, you know, the biggest autoimmune and immunotherapy companies in the world. And once they've locked into you, it's repeat or recurring revenue streams, I guess.
Well, I think, you know, once they have derived value from you in one program, it's certainly far easier once you've now got your foot in the door to cross-sell into other programs.
And it speeds up their development as well as not only reducing the cost, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, there's value across the piece for them. But it is a tough, knowledge-intensive sell in the first instance, and so you know, your listeners need to bear with us as we build a really stable pipeline of opportunities. I think we're demonstrating we have. Yeah,
and I'm guessing just finally, then, I mean, if I put a number out, would £100 million turnover in 10 years' time not be crazy?
I think we can certainly see our way to that sort
target
of
for the board
sort of number, and we can scale our way to that number with the existing business, quite frankly. But yes, it would be a fantastic day, wouldn't it?
Well, all I would say is that it wouldn't be, you know, sort of out of the world, given what. You know, Thrive is pre-commercial. It went for $2 billion, and Grail went for $8 billion, which again is largely pre-commercial. And we're talking about a $75 billion market. So if you only got £100 million of that market, then it'd still be, you'd still be a fairly small market share. And if you did a 10 times sales multiple of 100, even I could do the maths. That would be $1 billion, and you'd still only be valued at half the level of Thrive. So. You know, it shows you. I think it just shows the opportunity and the value in the IP that you guys have got. I'm guessing the IP is not only patented, but it's proprietary to you. Nobody else can. I mean, it would just take years to replicate the database and the platforms that you have.
That's right. I mean, you know, I tend to think of sort of three layers of protection to commercialization. The first, of course, is our patents. We have over 200 patents across the piece, that protecting a whole host of different things, all very relevant to our service and product today. And that patent estate has been challenged 18 times in the last 5 years, and not one of those challenges has a product or service on the market today. To give you a sense that this thing's been given a good shake and it's still very much standing. The second layer of protection is our papers. Over 150 papers and presentations we've now delivered, and in each one of those we have our brand associated with the result. So anyone who feels that they're able to overcome our patent estate has to now develop their own evidence, because it's not our evidence that they can use to validate and drive adoption of their product. And then finally, it's our people. And I have a team of 55, about 40 of whom are in science and science support roles, and they very much act as the brain trust that pivots IP into product. And we manage as trade secret within that group what it takes to deal with these fairly fiddly protein arrays and turn them into robust and reproducible product that can be used by other people to achieve the same sort of results that we get when we use it in our own laboratory.
Yeah, and again, I would say the other side of it is just look at the customer base, your Roche and your Novartis. I mean, these guys have got thousands of the cleverest scientists in the world, and if they can't replicate what you've done and they're coming to you on a repeat basis, then that just shows you how valuable that asset is, particularly if they're all sort of like trying to eat from the same plate at the same time. Just on news flow going forward, what should investors sort of expect? I'm guessing more sort of commercialization deals, more distribution deals like the one the other day.
Yeah, on the service side of the house, on the Immunoinsights business, because the sales cycles for initial engagement are quite long, we can forecast fairly accurately a quarter or two ahead of time new pharma contracts, and indeed, we have about 14 million quid of unconverted pipeline over the next 12 months that we're currently contracting or in negotiation to contract. So there will be more brands being added to our stable of in-flight contracts. In addition, I hope to be able to hook ourselves into the value that we spoke about earlier, and really go through another step change in growth that we're beyond that we're currently experiencing. On the product side of the house, we hope to be able to say something about adoption in the NHS in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
We feel that that's a very near-term bit of news flow, as well as announcing the outcome from some further health technology assessment. NICE did a beautiful medtech innovation briefing on us in March this year, and they've done a lot of diligence and work over the summer. So it would be fantastic to think that we could be put forward to full guidance in the not too distant future, which of course will support not just adoption in the UK, but further afield.
Yeah, if you get the NHS to rubber stamp it, I'm presuming it will just open a flood of orders from abroad as well.
That's the working thesis, yeah.
Okay, well, I wish. Well, thanks very much for your time, Adam, and I wish on a personal level that your clever scientists can certainly sort out Crohn's or colitis or any of those autoimmune diseases, because that would be personally for me a big win. So thanks for your time, Adam, and look forward in touching base again going forward.
Good to speak to you, Paul.